Roger and I have been wondering what we could do to celebrate running the Painting Academy and indeed this YouTube channel for 3 years now, and we threw around a few ideas and eventually settled on one that I was really excited about, because anyone who knows me well will be able to tell you that whilst I really love all the new miniatures, I also really love old miniatures. I've got a real nostalgic thing for them, and it might be rose-tinted glasses, it probably is, but you know what, I just really like them. And so what we did was start looking on eBay for a box set that I always wanted to get, and here it is. This is from 1997, which is when I first discovered this hobby, and when I first went into a Games Workshop store, this was brand new on the shelves. And as I said, I always wanted it, but never did get it. So what we did was start looking on eBay to see if we could try and find one. Now, eventually we found a good one, and so we tried really hard to win it, and win it we did. I was bidding right to the very last minute, and the wallet might have been crying, but I sure wasn't, because I'm really excited about this. Now, before we do open it up, if you're new to the channel, then please do subscribe and hit the notification bell if you like what we do. And if you're following us already, thank you so much. We're getting close to 300,000 subscribers now, which we're really excited about. But anyway, with all that out of the way, let's open this up because I can't wait any longer. And so here it is, Warhammer Epic 40,000. Massive armies clash in the 41st millennium, as the tagline goes on here, and this is such strong nostalgia for me. I love it. Now, as I said, this was brand new out in 97 when I first walked into a Games Workshop store, and I've always loved the artwork on the front. Now, it's very different to modern artwork that you get inside a box like this, but it's actually a John Blanche piece, and there's a lot of detail in it. It looks very busy at first glance, but the more you look at it, the more things you see. So the more little scenes in the background. There's even a Space Marine librarian in there. There's a Space Marine scout hidden away, and it's just really fun to look at it and just see what you can find. But that's the front cover, and on the back, of course, it has a little summary of what originally would have been in the box. Now, we know we don't exactly have this in here, but we do think all the rules and things are present, so that's what we're hoping for. There's a whole host of miniatures here that we're going to rummage through too, but oh, I love it, absolutely love it. Let's get it open. All right, let's take a look at what we've got inside, and well, looks like it's a pretty full box. Now, I know there's a load of miniatures in here, and I suspect they're going to be inside these two boxes here, but I can see we've got a load of scenery, the plastic ruins that came with it, and there's a few little orcs loose just here. I can see there's some on boars, and a shock attack gun as well by the looks of it. Now, also, we've got this pack in the way, and here we have a sprue of Space Marine tanks, and it looks like an Eldar sprue as well. Yeah, those are definitely aspect warriors on there, so we've got a few Eldar. There's a few loose bits here, and I can see underneath all of this we've got some of the cards. Looks like the rule book's under there. Yes, it is. I think what we're going to have to do is just get this all out and see what we've got. Here we are, it's a lot of stuff. We've got all the books and things, we've got some cards, some unit sheets, this sort of stuff. We've got dice, got some terrain, but of course what I'm really excited to take a look at is the miniatures which are in these boxes. So let's open these up. So here's our first box, and it's got some lovely artwork on the front and also on the back as well. And these are bringing back fond memories because all boxes used to have little sets like this inside them. And so let's open it up and see what we've got. And it appears it's lots and lots of stands of stuff. Definitely Space Marines for some of it, but it looks like orcs as well. Now, these stands are really small. I mean, well, they're absolutely tiny. So I think the only thing to do is going to be to get them all out, try and work out what we've got here, because the thing about these models being so small is it's easy to confuse one for the other. So this looks to me like a Devastator stand. So yeah, well, let's get them out and see what we've got. So here are all the Space Marines. Now, of course, we've got that sprue of some tanks as well, but just looking at the infantry, there is easily more than a company's worth of miniatures here, so plenty to get a core army. But it's not just Space Marines in here, we've also got some orcs, so let's take a look at those too. And here we've got the orcs, lots of orcs infantry, some stompers, we've got some bikes and some boars. Looks like quite a mix too, even commandos, storm boys, plenty really for the core of an army. And here it is, all the miniatures. Now, there was one frame of Eldar, but not quite enough for an army, but what there is a full army of Space Marines and a full army of Orks as well. And, well, plenty to play a game with, but this wouldn't be an Academy video without some painting as well. This isn't just an unboxing after all, so that's what we're going to do now. I'm going to show you how I approach painting such small scale miniatures. So what we're going to do is select a little starter detachment of Space Marines, and what we need to do is put them into some paint stripper just to get the old paint off there. Especially important with secondhand miniatures that are this small because the detail clogs very easily. So I'm going to do that. When we get them out of the stripper, what we can then do is undercoat them white. So here we are at the desk and we're ready to start painting, but just before we do so, what we want to do is show you the difference in size between a modern Space Marine and the Epic figures. And we have here a Blade Guard veteran who we painted a little while ago. Here he is, and here's the Epic stand that we're going to paint, and you can see just how different they are. They're so small. In fact, if you compare them to the rim of his base, they're barely taller than it. So you can get a good perspective here as to how big these figures are. And this brings us to an interesting point about small miniatures like this. The smaller the model gets, the more important contrast becomes on them, because you need those details to stand out. Just like on a regular figure, like a normal Primaris Marine, the reason why you'd highlight it and shade it is to help the details stand out at a distance. So, you know, on a gaming table, they look a little bit bigger than they actually are, but the smaller you get, the more important that becomes, because you need to mark out their silhouette to make it clear it's a Space Marine and not just like a tiny little triangle of plastic. So that means generally you want to go for lighter colours and have darker shading. So in the case of our Space Marines here, which I'm going to paint as Blood Angels again, it means then rather than starting at Mephiston Red, which is their usual colour, we want to go a step lighter. So it's going to be Evilson Scarlet, and that's also why I went for a white undercoat, to make that red a bit more punchy and a bit brighter. So what we need to do is just start out by painting them with that red. So Evilson Scarlet, and what I've got is my rough base coating brush here, an old medium base brush from Citadel. And what we want to do is just paint them entirely with this. And when doing this, really important thing, more than ever, thinning your paint down is extremely important because it's very easy to clog the detail on these figures. So go into this expecting to have to apply 2 or 3 thin coats, and more than ever, as I say, thin coats here are more important than 1 thick coat. So make sure that paint's nicely thinned, and then all we've got to do is just paint them entirely red. So it's just a matter of making sure that you cover all the detail, getting it into all the nooks and crannies, but also checking to make sure it's not clogged up too much in any one area. And here we have the Marines in that nice bright red, and so we can move on to the next step, which is going to be to do some shading on there. And you might be wondering at this stage, why haven't you just used a contrast paint? And the reason is because in my experiments, I found it came out more patchy, and so later on when we're cleaning up, it just took longer to get it all nice and neat. So I found the traditional base coat and wash were just quicker, and also it gave more contrast too, because what we're going to use is some Caribou Crimson now for that shading. Now to apply it, I'm going for a monster brush from the Army Painter, and this is like with the base coat, where you just need to bear in mind it is easy to overdo this, so you don't want to swamp the miniature. So definitely use a palette and tissue to remove excess paint as you need to when you're doing this sort of thing. But basically all we've got to do is just paint it all across the Marines and make sure it's worked into all those nooks and crannies as we go along. That wash is dry, and now suddenly we can see all the detail popping out on these models. So what we've got to do is start picking it out. And primarily what we need to do now is look for the black details. And what we can do for this is use a contrast paint. You can use some black Templar, and the reason for it is it's really strong, so it sort of works like a regular acrylic in that it overwhelms the colours beneath it, and so it base coats things black. But also, because it's quite inky, it'll go into the recesses too, so it's nice and easy to get into the very small nooks and crannies on here, easier than using a regular acrylic paint. Now once that's done, we can then pick out some silver details, and for this I'm just going to use some Surcoat Silver. But first of all, we want to go for that black. So it's black Templar, and to apply it, I've gone right down to my smallest brush. I've got a 00 here from Artis Opus, and I'm just going to be very careful in neatly applying this to certain details. Now, I'm not going to thin it down with any water. I'm just going to keep it quite strong straight out the pot, and what I'm looking for first of all is going to be the bolt guns. And when it comes to these, we just want to carefully go in and colour them in entirely, even the parts that are going to be silver later on. So there's the little sickle magazine just there. I want to go carefully over that hand and get the muzzle right there. So it's that sort of thing on each guy. The missile launcher is going to be entirely this colour at this stage too. So we're looking at all this area around here. And on the back, there's also a little bit that we want to get. Now this is later going to be silver, but I just want to base coat it almost with this to darken it right down. So we're looking at that bit just there. Now later on, I do plan to paint the shoulder pad rims black, and I'm not going to do that with this. The reason is because the recessed line out of the actual rim here is not that well defined. So I want to do it with a little bit more control with a regular acrylic paint. So I'm just going to avoid that for the time being and come back to it later. With that done, it's now time for the silver. So here I'm using some Cerakote silver, and with it I'm going to pick out some details on the bolters. So we're looking at things like the sickle magazines down there, the little muzzle of the gun just around there too, and on the back we want to get the silver parts of the backpack. So we're looking at this sort of area here. Then on the missile launcher I'm just going to pick out a few details here as well. I've got all that silver on there now, and you can see it's on the backpack too. And now what I want to do is just a little bit more on that silver, just to give it a little bit of depth in some areas. So I'm just going to put a black wash on some select parts. So you might be thinking, is it really worth it on something so small? But on textured areas, I think it is, because it only takes a moment to do it. I'm going to use some Oblivion black wash for this, and all I'm going to do is just apply it over the more textured silver parts, or the really large ones where I want a little bit of shading for it. Because I don't need much, I'm sticking to that 00 brush, and really for the regular Marines, I'm just looking at doing it on their backpacks. So these little parts just here, I'm just going to run it over these ridges, as I say, just to give a little bit of depth to those parts. Now in addition, I want to paint it over some of the parts of the missile launcher too, to make it look nice and neat, so I'm looking at these sorts of areas around here. Now that wash is dry, we can move on to the next step, which is going to be to clean up the red a little bit before we move on to the finishing touches, and also to really boost that contrast on the miniature too. And so to do this, I'm going to return to Evilson Scarlet, and I'm just going to quickly layer it onto some of the larger red areas to make sure they're nice and smooth and a little bit brighter. So this time I'm using a size 0 brush, so slightly larger than the one I was using previously, and with it, I'm just going to get a small amount of this nicely thinned down, and just start looking for these large parts of the miniature that we can layer on. So the obvious one is of course going to be the shoulder plates, where we just want to paint the middle of them. So it's going to be areas such as just there, just a quick amount there. But on top of the backpack, just a little flick on the helmet. On the legs, we just want to go on these side parts that are standing out. So we're looking at just there and just there. So all these kind of bits there like that. We'll keep it nice and quick, but you can see doing this just makes it a bit cleaner as we move on. Now the red's a bit brighter, it's time to add some black on there to really mark out the contrast in the miniature, to really make those details pop. And at the same time, we can also paint in the shoulder pad rims. And so what we need now is a regular black acrylic. So in this case, I'm going to use some Doom Death Black. And to apply it, I'm going back to that size 00 brush, because I want a lot of control here, because not only are we going to paint in some details such as the shoulder pad rims, but also we're going to start lining in some fine detail here as well. So definitely make sure the paint's thinned down so it's a little bit inky. I'll get it down to about that point there. And then with this, I'm going to start out with those shoulder pad rims. So Blood Angels in the modern day don't really have these black rims, but I think it looks really good on these because it helps break up the red a little bit, adds a bit more interest to it. And remember, we're looking to emphasize the silhouette here, and doing this definitely makes those shoulder plates stand out. So that's the main reason I'm doing it on these ones. So there you go, carefully there like that. In addition, I'm going to pick out one of the knees, which will simulate where the squad marking goes. So that's going to be this one just here. And once those are done, then it's time for the fine lining. Now this is to really boost that contrast, and basically what I'm looking for is the lines between armor panels, such as on the foot at the front here. I'm just going to run this directly into that corner. So just there, then around this knee pad, so it's going to be around there like that. On the back of the body, what we've got are the joints here on the legs, so we want to go for these ones around there and around there. There's also the ones just up here, and then we also want to make sure that we've got the separation around where the arms meet the head and where the shoulder pads are up against the head, so definitely make sure it's dark in that corner just there. And also the line that separates the head from the backpack, we want to make sure that's marked in there as well. So it's just areas like that, just to help separate those details and make them pop from a distance. And with that done, you can see now we've got that contrast on the miniature with that really dark black in the recesses, and then we've got the brighter red on the raised up areas. So now the detail of the Marine is standing out really nicely. And you could of course just leave it here if you want to, but what I'm now going to do is a few extra optional steps of just a few highlights on there, which again you don't even have to do, and you might question why on such small miniatures, but it does make a difference, and also only takes a minute or two to do because everything's so small. What we're going to do is go for a nice bright orange first of all for that red. So here I'm going to use some Fire Dragon Bright, and then we're going to highlight the top of the shoulder pad rims, and for this we just need a nice grey. So I'm going to use Dungeon Stone Grey here. But first of all, I'm going to apply some of that Fire Dragon Bright, and definitely sticking to the small brush. All we're looking to do is to emphasize a few features that appear on top of the Marine. So we're not worried about highlighting everything. We're basically looking at the focal point of the model, which is going to be around the head mostly, but also the tops of those shoulders, as they're such an important part of the silhouette of a Space Marine. So what we're going to do is get this nicely thinned, and then on each Marine, we're first of all looking at their head. So if we take a look at this guy right here, what we want to do is just emphasize the brow a little bit with a line right there and a line right there. That central vent on top of the helmet as well, so just there, and then just a little brush across the mouthpiece right there. Then on the backpack, we just need to do a little bit just at the very top of it, so that's going to be right there. So that's all we need to apply. And then for the shoulder plates, it's just a matter of painting a line across the top of them next to that black line on either side. So we're looking at going across there and across here. And then finally, we just need to add a little highlight to the shoulder plate tops because again, they're such an iconic feature. And all we need is a little bit of Dungeon Stone Grey just applied across the top of the crescent of it, so around here. And with that, those teeny tiny Space Marines are complete, except for the base, of course, and we will come back to that later on. But now we've painted the infantry, what we need to do now is paint a vehicle, because sometimes that vehicle would have a base too. And so what we're going to do is paint a Land Raider, and tanks like this are a massive part of Epic because you have really big formations of them, so really cool for that. And what we need to do is paint it in a very similar way to the infantry by, again, looking for that bright colour and also contrast. So once again, I've started from a white undercoat. We're going to start out by using that same red, so Evil Sun Scarlet, and then washing it again with Caribou Crimson. So we need some Evil Sun Scarlet to begin with, and I'm back to my medium base brush for this, and this is going to be just the same process as when we originally base coated those little infantry a little while ago. It's just a matter of making sure the paint's thinned down, and then all we've got to do is blocking the tank entirely with this colour. With the base coat done, it's now time to apply Caribou Crimson all across the miniature using the monster brush once again. And as you can see whilst doing this, I've actually got the miniature temporarily glued to a spare old base. And that's because otherwise it'd be really hard to handle the model whilst applying paint like this. So it's just a useful little thing to have, which can break the model off later on. And there we are, the wash is dry, and so now what we're going to do is something different from what we did on the infantry, because in the vehicles there's lots of open spaces and very sharp edges and things, so dry brushing them is actually perfect for layering and highlighting them, which means we need to do that now before we start painting in some finer details. So what we need to do is return to some Evil Sun Scarlet first, and then we're going to move right up to some Fire Dragon Bright. But we'll start with Evil Sun Scarlet, and to apply it I have a small dry brush here from Citadel, and with it we want a fairly heavy dry brush on this one. So whilst I'm going to work the paint into the brush, I'm not going to go really far getting rid of most of it. I want it down to about that point there, and then it's a matter of applying it in a fairly heavy fashion in a sort of rounded motion like this, so that it covers mostly on the flat panels, goes right at the edges but doesn't fall into the recesses. With that done, we can then move on to Fire Dragon Bright, and with this one we're looking for a lighter flicking motion so the paint just catches the corners and gives us a highlight on the armour of the tank. And there we are, now we've got that highlight on the red armour. What we can do is move on to painting in the smaller details, and for this we're going to start out with some Black Templar, much like we did on the infantry, and again this is going to be for all the black details but also all the silver details, and being with this contrast paint, it's quite inky, it's going to settle in the recesses nicely and be quite easy to manipulate around the miniature. Now to start out with, I'm using a size 1 brush here, but it's always a good idea to have a smaller one on hand for some of the finer details, but with this what I'm going to do is just start out with the tracks, and it's a good size for that sort of thing. Again, I'm not diluting it so as to retain the strength of the colour, because we do want it to block everything in with a solid black, and it's just a matter of looking for all these details that we want to be either silver or black, such as the tracks and the weapons, and just neatly blocking them in. With all that now painted black, we can move on to adding in the metallics here using some silver, and because it's all black it's going to be really quick and really easy to do it, and any that we miss will sort of look like shading, so it's nice and quick for things like this when you're painting small miniatures. So what we're going to use is some Cerakote Silver, and once it's on there we'll then wash it down to get some definition in the recesses using some Oblivion Black Wash. But first of all we need Cerakote Silver, and to apply it I'm still using my size 1 here because so many of these details are easy to get to, but again I'm going to have a smaller one on hand for more intricate parts around the weapons and things. But really it's a matter of just making sure it's thinned as ever and then looking for these parts and blocking them in. So for example, the track links are something I want to paint silver, and we're looking at doing all of this around here, just being really careful of the red when we get to the edge, but also I'm going to pick out some silver details on the weapons as well. I'm happy with all that silver, so now it's time to apply a black wash over the top, and here I'm using some Oblivion Black Wash just painted directly over all of this silver. That wash is now dry and the tank is ready to rumble into battle, but like with the infantry, this is something where if you wanted to, you could add a few extra highlights just to make it stand out a little bit more, and that's what I'm going to do now because it's pretty quick to do. And for this, what we need to do is use some Fire Dragon Bright once again, and this is going to be on the red just to sharpen some details up, and then we'll move on to the black. For this, I'm going to use some Dungeon Stone Grey. But first of all, I've got that Fire Dragon Bright, and I'm down to my 00 brush here, and like with the infantry, what we're looking to do is just accentuate some of the more sharp features that are standing out. So on the infantry, that was on top of them, and in the case of this tank, what we're looking for are the sharper angles on the hull. So for example, we're going to be doing things such as the assault ramp that's at the front, just highlight a few little bits across the front of here, just using the side of the brush just to skim along a few of those edges. Also, we want to look at some of the side of the hull, where again, we can approach carefully the side of the brush and just skim along these little bits there like that. And doing this just helps sharpen it a little bit and helps these details stand out just a bit more. And then finally, using some Dungeon Stone Grey, we can just add a few quick highlights on some of the more prominent black areas. And with that, the little Land Raider is complete. And so now we've painted a tank, we've painted some infantry, but what we've not done yet are the bases. So we're going to start doing that now. Now, when it comes to basing epic miniatures, a really important thing to think about is the scale, because if you just use sand on them like regular miniatures, it'll basically look too big. It's like boulders that they're trying to move in between. So you've got to go for something finer. And so what I like to use is some texture paint. Now, the one I'm going to use is this one. It's Dry Ground from AK Interactive, so it's a nice light color. And I've chosen this one because of its color, because, well, the miniature color scheme, even with our bright paints on there, is relatively dark, so we're going for a very light neutral colour for the base, so that again we get that strong contrast between the two, so the miniatures really pop out from it. So we're going to use that, and then we'll move on to washing the grit to get a little bit of well, shading in there. And for this, I'm going to use some Battlewood wash thinned down with a bit of water so it doesn't go too dark. Now once that's dry, all we've got to do is bring out the texture, and to do this I'm going to dry brush it using some Vampire Fang. But first of all, what we need to do is apply that texture paint, and so it's time for that dry ground. Now to do this, what I like to do is start out with an older brush that's sort of medium sized. So I've got a regiment brush here from the Army Painter for this, and with it what I want to do is just scoop up some of this paint and then pick a more open part on the base, so for example around here, and you just start putting it on and just patting it down and building it up in areas like that. So I'll just get a little bit more. Again, just apply it there like that, and what I do is work my way across all the front, then all the back. Now once that's on there, whilst it's still wet, what I then do is switch to another old brush. This is a small layer from Citadel with quite a fine point on it, because with this what we can do is start poking it in amongst the feet of the miniature, so this way you can get it all the way around it without getting it onto the miniature itself. I've given the texture paint about an hour to dry, and so now it's time to wash it, and here I'm using some Battlewood wash which I've diluted with water around 50-50 just to thin it down a bit so it's not going to overwhelm the ground. The wash is now dry, so the next thing to do is to lightly dry brush it using some Vampire Fang, just very carefully with this older brush, just to be careful of the feet of the miniatures. And then what I've got to do is just paint the rim of the base, and here I'm going to use some Dust Bowl. Then finally I'm going to add one or two little tufts of some tiny tufts which are beige in colour from Gamer Grass, just to add a little bit more life to the base. And here we have the completed detachment, and well, I've been through the Army's book and worked it out. It's quite a small force, it's only worth about 200 points, but you know what, it's a start, and I think some reinforcements are in order. In particular, I think a few dreadnoughts. So if you ever find yourself painting small miniatures like this, remember the things in this video, and the first of those things is contrast. Go for brighter colours than you normally would and make them really vibrant and punchy, and when it comes to the shading, really have that contrast there. Go right down to black and fine line things in there. And this is true when you get to the base as well. Go for a colour that's completely different to the miniatures that you've got. In addition, with the base, remember to think about scale. You want everything there to be really small, including the grit, so I recommend you don't use sand because it's quite large. Instead, look for that really fine texture, and if you're going to use tufts, use really small ones. But anyway, we really hope you enjoyed this video and celebrating our 3 years with us, and thank you so much for following us and supporting us. And if you haven't already, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you again very soon.